It's the late fall of 1985, and the cold Ohio wind drums against my window, sounding exactly like the rain we heard on that damned island 40 years ago. I sit at the old oak desk in my study, a piece of flannel soaked with gun oil in my hand, gently wiping down the old partner that's been with me for half a century. It's a Colt M1911A1 automatic pistol, chambered in .45 ACP. Kids these days like those flashy 9mm pistols. Big magazine, low recoil, light in the hand like plastic toys. Not me. When I wrap my fingers around this M1911A1, when I feel that solid 1.1 kilos of loaded weight, I feel safe. Time has eaten away at its Parkerized finish. The dark gray has been polished bright, exposing the cold, hard steel underneath. In the checkering on the grips, I sometimes think there's still South Pacific red clay and dried blood ground into the grooves. I rack the slide. Clack. Crisp and heavy. The perfect symphony of steel locking into place. That sound can pull me back in an instant, back to the summer of 1942. Back to that green hell of malaria, rotting corpses, and cordite. December 7th, 1941, Sunday morning. I was in a diner in Detroit with a few guys from the plant, having breakfast. The music on the radio cut off mid-song, and the announcer's voice came on, shaking. Pearl Harbor has been attacked. This is not a drill. For a moment, the diner went dead silent. Then the whole United States, like some giant machine that had been asleep for years, suddenly had its on switch slammed down. Anger. Pure, molten, volcanic anger. A month later, I was standing in boot camp in San Diego. 3 months of hell. The drill instructors didn't just teach us how to ram a bayonet into a straw dummy's gut. More importantly, through this pistol, they taught us what stopping power meant. "Listen up, you landlocked idiots," the DI shouted, waving a brand new M1911A1 in his hand, flecks of spit landing on my face. "The Japs are small, but they're tough as rabid dogs. You hit them with some .22 or .32 pop gun, they can take 5 holes and still charge up to bite your goddamn throat out. But..." He snapped the pistol up and fired at the distant target. Bang, bang, bang. That wasn't just gunfire. That was thunder. Each round kicked hard, the muzzle rose, then snapped back on target. "But this," he roared, "this is .45 caliber. That's an 11.43mm chunk of solid lead. You hit him anywhere, shoulder, arm, doesn't matter. That son of a bitch is going to fly back like he got hit by a truck. This gun isn't for tickling the enemy. It's for turning their lights out." Back then, I just thought the pistol was heavy as hell. The recoil numbed my wrist. I didn't know that just a few months later, that bone-jarring kick would become the only lifeline I could still grab hold of in the dark. It was around that time that America's industrial heart started beating like crazy. The slide on my pistol is stamped Colts P TFAMFGCO. But later in the war, you'd see M1911A1s marked Remington Rand, Ithaca, even Union Switch and Signal. Sewing machine factories, typewriter factories, railroad signal companies, America turned them all loose. Millions of these big-bore pistols poured into the Pacific like water from a broken dam. That was our confidence. And our enemy would soon realize how foolish it was to enrage a country with that kind of industrial might. August 7th, 1942. Operation Watchtower. As part of the 1st Marine Division's spearhead, we landed on an island called Guadalcanal. At first, everything went so smoothly, it was unnerving. We took the unfinished airfield the Japanese were still building, later named Henderson Field. That was where our luck ran out. The Japanese Navy reacted lightning fast. Our supply ships were forced to withdraw and left us stranded. From that moment on, we weren't hunters anymore. We were trapped animals. The island was the devil's own artwork. The wet heat clung to you like a hot, soaked blanket. Mud swallowed you up to the ankles. Mosquitoes were the size of dive bombers. But the nights were the worst. The Japanese loved to attack at night. They believed sheer willpower could beat firepower, believed that in the dark, a bayonet was more useful than a bullet. In the early hours of August 21st, the Battle of the Tanaru River exploded. It was the first major American victory in ground combat in the Pacific, and the first time the M1911A1 faced off directly against the Japanese Nambu Type 14 pistol. That night, I was prone in a foxhole behind sandbags, clutching my M1903 Springfield. Out of the darkness came that chilling scream, "Banzai! Banzai!" Hundreds of Japanese from Ichiki's detachment surged across the sandbar like a human tide. Flares arced into the sky, washing the world in a ghostly glow, faces twisted with madness, bayonets glittering. In a heartbeat, the fighting turned white-hot. Machine guns roared, grenades burst, but the Japanese were insane. They trampled over their own dead, pouring into our lines. A Japanese officer vaulted into my foxhole just as I fired a shot. My Springfield's bolt was still closed on an empty chamber. I didn't have time to work it. He swung down at me with a katana, that iconic officer's sword. At his hip, I saw a holster shaped like a turtle shell. Life and death don't give you time to think. My right hand let go of the rifle on pure instinct, drew the M1911A1 from my hip, thumb sweeping the safety down as I brought the muzzle up toward the blur in front of me. Bang! He was less than 6 feet away. The muzzle flash lit up the bottom of the hole. I felt that familiar slam into my palm. A 230-grain FMJ round hit him square in the chest. He didn't just fall, he was smashed backward. The impact snapped his charge off in mid-motion. He flew back into the sandbags, the sword flying from his hand. If it had been a 9mm, maybe the bullet would have punched through him, and he might have had enough juice left to drive that blade into my ribs. But the 45 ACP tumbled and dumped all its energy inside him, wrecking his nervous system and guts in an instant. Panting, I watched him twitch twice in the muddy water and then go still. That was the first man I ever killed. I did it with this old partner. At dawn, we policed the battlefield. The Tanaru shoreline was piled with roughly 800 Japanese bodies. My buddy Big Mike and I went to inspect the officer I'd shot. I picked up the pistol lying by his body, the famous Nambu Type 14. We'd heard plenty of stories about Japanese weapons. Some guys swore their pistols were copies of the German Luger P08, finely made. But the thing I held in my hand was a joke. "Looks like a damn toy," Mike muttered, wiping down his own M1911, giving my new trophy a contemptuous glance. "Just look at that workmanship." The Type 14 did resemble a Luger on the outside, but the guts were totally different. It fired the 8mm Nambu round, an anemic little cartridge with laughable power. I fiddled with it. The action was absurdly awkward. You had to pinch that goofy little knob to rack the slide. And the firing pin. "Check this out," I said, pointing to the exposed firing pin rod at the rear. "I heard the striker spring they use is junk. A little wear and it loses tension. Then you get light strikes and misfires." That's when I noticed a round jammed in the chamber. "Looks like you're lucky, Jack," Mike said, grinning. "That bastard probably tried to shoot you last night, and the damn thing jammed." That was the Nambu 14's fatal flaw. A badly designed extractor paired with lousy ammunition tolerances. The result? Constant jams. Some guys even said if the pistol was cocked and you dropped or banged it hard, it could discharge on its own, but when you needed it to save your life, it wouldn't fire. Compared to that, the M1911A1 in my hand was an industrial miracle. That afternoon, I laid the two pistols side by side. M1911A1. Mechanism, Browning short recoil system, built like a brick. Drop it in mud, fish it out, shake it off, it'll still run. Power, 0.45 ACP, one shot, one man down. Safety, grip safety plus thumb safety. That's cocked and locked. Hammer back, safety on. It only roars when you truly grip it and mean it. Reload. Press the button behind the trigger guard. Mag drops free, new mag in. Smack the slide stop down. Back in action in under 2 seconds. One-handed if you have to. Nambu Type 14. Mechanism. Complicated locking system that chokes on dust and sand. Power. 8mm Nambu, about half the energy of 45 ACP, weaker than some police revolvers. Safety. A clumsy rotating lever you can hardly operate one-handed. You need the other hand just to get it off safe. Reload. The stupidest idea of all. When you shoot it dry, the slide locks back. But when you pull the magazine out, the slide slams forward on an empty chamber. That means you have to hold the slide back manually while stuffing in a fresh mag. On a battlefield where seconds equal death, that extra fumbling is a death sentence. "This is why we're gonna win, Mike," I said, tossing the Nambu onto the pile of captured junk and sliding my M1911 back into its holster. "Our country gives us tools to kill the enemy. Theirs gives them tools to get themselves killed. If Tenaru taught me what the M1911 could do, then the night of October 24th, 1942 showed me how it could become legend in a hero's hands. That was the bloodiest moment in the defense of Henderson Field. Japan's 2nd Division was throwing itself at our lines like rabid beasts. On the very front line, there was a sergeant named John Basilone. We called him Manila John because he'd served in the Philippines before the war. That night, rain was pouring. Visibility was crap. Mike and I were covering Basilone's flank. Basilone commanded 2 M1917 heavy machine guns. The Japanese came at us like an endless field of grain being scythed down, wave after wave. Basilone moved between the 2 guns like a man possessed, clearing jams, swapping hot barrels, and then came the scene I will never forget. One gun seized up from overheating, and the other ran dry just as a dozen Japanese charged to within 10 yards of him. He didn't back up an inch. He drew his M1911A1. It was the fastest shooting I've ever seen. In the darkness, his .45 spit flame. He wasn't spraying and praying. Every shot had a target, and every shot made someone drop. Bang! A sergeant leading the charge took a round to the face and fell straight back. Bang! Another man raising a grenade had his wrist shattered, the grenade falling at his feet and going off. Basilone's movements were smooth as a drill. At arm's-length ranges, he turned the M1911A1's stopping power into precious seconds, enough time to reload his heavy gun and get it firing again. I don't remember how many magazines he ran through that night. I only remember that by the time he slapped fresh belts into his guns and opened up again, there were several Japanese bodies at his feet, torn apart by close-range .45 rounds. That night, Basilone practically wiped out an entire company by himself. They gave him the Medal of Honor later. To those of us who were there were 2 heroes, that man and the red-hot M1911A1 in his hand. By contrast, the next morning, cleaning up bodies, I found a dead Japanese machine gunner. His Nambu Type 14 was still in his holster, but the flap had swollen shut from the rain-soaked leather. He died without ever getting his sidearm out. That's the difference. On those bitter Pacific battlefields, details meant life or death. Weapons decided fate. The Guadalcanal campaign dragged on for 6 months. 6 months of fighting not just the Japanese, but malaria and hunger. Our uniforms rotted off, our boots wore through, but the weapons in our hands became newer and more plentiful. In early '43, when we finally shipped out of that blasted island to rest in Australia, I was shocked by what I saw in the rear area armories. Stacks and stacks of brand new M1911A1s. I picked one up and noticed the markings were different, not just Colt anymore. "Hey, Jack, look at this," Mike said, handing me another pistol. "This one says, Remington Rand Incorporated, Syracuse, New York." "That's a typewriter company, Mike," I laughed. "Typewriters, sewing machines, I don't care," he said. racking the slide and listening to the sharp steel-on-steel click. If they send the Japs back home in a box, they're a damn good company. It hit me hard. Early on Guadalcanal, we'd been counting bullets. Now the American industrial engine was fully awake. I heard that not just Remington Rand, but Ithaca Gun Company, Union Switch and Signal, even Singer, the sewing machine folks, had all gotten contracts to make M1911A1s. Singer didn't make many, but even their factory workers had put aside dresses and curtains to turn out weapons for us. These companies used to build the tools of peacetime, typewriters to record contracts, sewing machines to stitch pretty dresses, signal equipment to guide trains home. Now, to deal with the savages rampaging across the Pacific, they were all turning out these simple, brutal, powerful chunks of steel. Mass production brought more than just numbers. The new M1911A1s had better Parkerized finishes, more rust-resistant than the old bluing. The mainspring housings were reshaped to fit the hand better. At the same time, the Japanese weapons we captured were getting worse. Late-war Nambus were crude, tool marks all over the metal, springs made from garbage steel. Two countries in miniature. America, a boxer just finishing his warm-up, muscles swelling with power. Japan, still thrashing its arms wildly while its insides collapsed from resource starvation and industrial exhaustion. Our rest in Melbourne was brief and sweet. We all knew it was just the calm before the storm. The next target was Tarawa Atoll in the Gilberts, an island the Japanese boasted 1,000,000 men in 100 years couldn't take. On the landing craft heading toward Tarawa, I stripped my M1911A1 down again, checking every part. I wiped off every grain of dust, laid a thin film of oil in the slide rails. Then I looked at the new kids around me. Most of them were 19, faces tight with nerves. "Hey, Sergeant," a kid named William asked, "can this pistol really kill a man? In the movies, the cowboys always have to shoot like 5 times. I drew the pistol and tilted it so they could see that wide, dark muzzle. "Kid," I said, looking him in the eye, "this isn't the movies. This is a hammer that'll knock an elephant on its ass. If you're unlucky enough to meet a Jap up close, don't panic. Wait till you can see his big front teeth. One shot, just one, and I promise he's not getting back up." On the horizon, Tarawa was already a dark smudge. Ahead lay worse fighting, more death. But I wasn't afraid. I knew we had an endless industrial tide at our backs. And at my side, I carried the most reliable friend on this planet. It was an American legend, the M1911A1. And its story was just getting started. November 20th, 1943. If you ask me what hell looks like, I'll tell you it's not all flames and demons. Sometimes hell is blue and red. Like the lagoon around Betio, the main island of Tarawa. Even 40 years later, in nightmares, I can still smell it. The salt of the sea, diesel smoke, and that sickening reek of blood baking under a tropical sun. Our intelligence people had made a fatal mistake: tides. On paper, our amphibious tractors and landing craft were supposed to ride right up onto the beach. That day, the tide was freakishly low. Our landing craft grounded out on coral reefs 500 yards from shore like beached whales. "Out, everybody out, waiting landing." That was Death himself giving orders. I jumped into chest-deep water. Ice-cold seawater flooded into my boots and into the holster at my hip. For machinery, salt water and sand are the worst enemies. Salt eats metal, sand jams slides. But I didn't have time to worry. Up ahead, Japanese machine guns were chattering non-stop. Water plumed all around us like a rainstorm hitting a pond. Except every drop could kill you. The kid next to me hadn't even set foot on the coral before a heavy MG round took his skull off. His blood bloomed in the blue water, spreading like some obscene flower. We held our M1s over our heads and staggered forward. The coral underfoot was razor sharp. Every step threatened to send you sprawling. A mortar shell went off not far away. The shock wave slammed me under the water. I went under completely, rifle and pistol and all. Mud and sand flooded my ears, nose, and probably the gun barrel too. When I clawed back to the surface, gasping, my M1 was caked in filth. Gas system probably plugged, action packed with grit. In that condition, if you forced a shot, you were more likely to blow the gun and yourself apart than kill anybody. I ditched it and reached for my hip, time to see what was real and what was just talk. I drew the dripping M1911A1. Seawater ran off the black grips, sand grated inside the slide. On the range, a DI would have murdered you for this. In combat, the gun had to work. Not 30 yards ahead, a Japanese suicide trooper burst from the water, seaweed hanging off him, a grenade with the pin pulled clutched in his fist, screaming as he lunged at us, sitting ducks stuck in the surf. I brought the gun up. No sights, no careful aim, pure instinct. Click, safety off, bang. The slide slammed back, still cycling at full speed, flinging out the empty case and a spray of seawater and sand. The Jap's chest blossomed red. The grenade slipped from his hand and dropped into the water. A heartbeat later, a dull underwater thump sent a column of water and what was left of him skyward. "It still works," I bellowed to the terrified men around me. "This goddamn American iron still works." That's the magic of the M1911A1. Browning must have known what kind of abuse this pistol would take. The internal tolerances weren't watchmaker tight, they were war tight. That looseness gave it room to shrug off filth. Sand, mud, seawater. Short of filling it with concrete, that old gun would chug along like a tractor. If wading the lagoon was the first layer of hell, the seawall was the center. We got pinned down behind a coconut log seawall on Red Beach 2. The Japanese bunkers were cunningly designed, low-firing slits, crisscrossing fields of fire that covered every inch of sand. Here, long guns turned into liabilities. In belly crawl, close-quarters fights where you were constantly diving into pits and trenches, the M1 was just too long. Turn wrong and you'd bang the muzzle into a wall and die 2 seconds later. That's when the M1911A1 became the perfect trench-clearing tool. We had to take a strong point we called the pocket, full of one-man spider holes. Japs hid in them with palm fronds over the top, waiting for us to walk by so they could shoot us in the back. I was working with a flamethrower team. "Cover me, Jack!" shouted Robert, our flamethrower man, staggering under his fuel tank. I went ahead of him with the pistol. Suddenly, the sand in front of me heaved. A Jap under camouflage netting burst up, a Type 38 rifle with a bayonet leveled at my gut. He was less than 3 feet away. With a rifle in my hands, I'd never have gotten the barrel around in time. But a pistol is just an extension of your arm. I didn't even straighten my arm. I kept the gun tight at my hip, using what they later called point shooting. With my left hand, I shoved the bayonet aside. My right hand pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, 2.45s into his belly. The impact folded him in half like a boiled shrimp and dumped him back into his hole. I stepped up and put another round down into the hole. "Clear!" Robert surged forward, bathing the bunker slit beside us in flame. The screams inside didn't sound human. The air stank of burnt meat. That afternoon, my slide got so hot I could barely hold it. I burned through all 7 magazines on my belt, 49 rounds, and had to scavenge 45 ammo from the dead. Later, catching my breath in a shattered emplacement, I saw a sight I'll never forget. A young lieutenant's carbine had jammed. He stood facing a Japanese officer, swinging a katana. The Jap roared, bringing the sword down in both hands. The lieutenant was cold as ice. He raised his M1911, one-handed, and before that blade could fall, bang! The bullet hit dead center in the forehead. That was big-bore handgun physics. A little round might have ricocheted off bone, or let the man's momentum carry the blade through. The 45 ACP hit like a sledgehammer, turned his skull into rubble. He went over backward like a felled tree, the heirloom sword ringing on the coral. That wasn't just killing. It was overwhelming psychological and industrial dominance, the vaunted Bushido spirit shattered by a mass-produced American chunk of steel. On the second day at Tarawa, things were still desperate. We were pinned on the beach. Every yard cost blood. That's when I saw another future legend, Staff Sergeant William J. Bordelon of San Antonio, Texas, a combat engineer. If the M1911A1 has a soul, it lives in men like Bordelon, stubborn, violent, relentless. Several Japanese bunkers were tearing our landing craft to ribbons. Bordelon was already wounded, helmet shot off, face streaming blood, left arm sliced open by shrapnel, but he refused to pull back. As an engineer, his job was demolitions. He carried satchel charges. He didn't bother with the awkward carbine. In his good hand, he gripped his M1911A1. I watched him stand up in that storm of fire. "Covering fire," he rasped. He charged like a wounded bull at the nearest bunker. Two Japanese tried to cut him off, scrambling along a communication trench. Bordelon didn't even slow down. He fired while running. Bang, bang, 2 shots, 2 bodies down, textbook moving fire. That pistol might as well have been bolted to his hand. He slid into the dead ground beside the firing port, yanked the fuse on a satchel charge, shoved it inside, then dove away. Boom! Concrete and limbs flew. He didn't stop. He grabbed more charges in his one good hand and sprinted for a second bunker. More enemy crawled up to intercept him. His explosives weren't ready yet. It was suicide, not for Bordelon. He took cover behind a wrecked Amtrak and used that 7-shot pistol to hold off a whole squad. I watched, stunned. He'd fire, shift position, fire again. Any Japanese who showed so much as a helmet got greeted by 11.43 millimeters of persuasion. He changed mags with blinding speed, thumb release, mag drops, fresh mag slams home, slide forward, back in the fight, all between tossing satchel charges. He was a one-man army with limited ammo. That morning, he knocked out 4 bunkers in a row. A machine gun burst finally got him on his way to the 5th. When he fell, he was still gripping that M1911. It had guarded him every step of his hero's road until his last breath. They gave him the Medal of Honor posthumously. To us on that blood-soaked beach, he was an avenging angel, and that .45 was the flaming sword in his hand. Bordelon died, but his courage infected us. We went mad with counterattacks. By the 3rd day, it turned into a hide-and-kill operation. General Shibasaki was dead, but his survivors clung on in tunnels and bunkers. This was a war of pistols and flamethrowers. We formed cleanup teams. My squad was assigned to clear a Japanese underground command post south of the airstrip. Inside it was pitch black and stank of sulfur and rot. In those cramped tunnels, the M1 was useless. Even a Thompson was awkward. I taped a flashlight under the barrel of my M1911A1, a field expedient rig of our own invention, and led the way down. "Watch for booby traps," I muttered to Mike behind me. We turned a corner, and my beam hit a pale face. It was a makeshift underground hospital. Dozens of wounded men lay on the ground. At the back, several unhurt soldiers guarded a heavy machine gun. The beam gave us away. "Fire!" I yelled. In that narrow space, gunfire was deafening, like someone banging pots inside your skull. The M1911A1 flashed in the dark. 2 bayonet-wielding Japanese rushed us. At that distance, no rifleman alive could cycle a bolt in time. This was pistol country. I double-tapped the man on the left. First round gut-shot him, second hit his chest. The shock drove him straight to his knees, rifle clattering away. The other one was nearly on top of Sparks. Yeah, that was the kid's nickname. His bayonet already brushing Sparks' jacket. Sparks panicked and fired his carbine, hitting the man in the shoulder, but it didn't stop his charge. In the instant before that blade punched into Sparks' chest, I swung the pistol. Bang! The round hit the side of his neck. That's where the .45 is monstrous. You hit limbs, it breaks bones. You hit a neck, it's decapitation in all but name. He flew sideways, blood spraying all over Sparks' face. We finished it fast. When we finally crawled back into the sulfur-stinking open air, Sparks collapsed, hands trembling. "Thanks, Jack." And, "Thanks to it," he said, nodding at the pistol in my hand. I looked down at my M1911A1. The slide was coated in dust and speckled with blood. The barrel glowed faint red from rapid fire, but it was still cocked, still ready to roar. On Iwo Jima, that gun saved my life at least 3 times. Every time it was nose to nose, every time in places a rifle might as well have been a broomstick. In the final days, Japanese desperation reached new heights. Iwo had no airfields for kamikazes, but later on, we met those too. Once, a crippled Zero made a crash landing near our lines. The pilot didn't surrender or shoot himself. He climbed out and drew his sidearm, another Nambu Type 14. I stood a short distance away, M1911 leveled, motioning for him to surrender. His eyes were hollow but fanatic. He raised the pistol to shoot, and again that farce played out. His gun jammed. Maybe from the crash, maybe from yet another bad spring. He yanked at the slide in panic. Nothing. I didn't shoot right away. I looked at him, at this living fragment of what had once been a terrifying empire. Thin-skinned planes built for range, not armor. Pistols that jammed. Tactics built on suicide. He finally hurled the pistol away and drew his sword, screaming as he charged. This time I didn't hesitate. Bang! 145 round ended his last banzai. He dropped onto the black volcanic sand like a cut kite. I walked over and picked up the jammed Nambu. The date markings read Showa 19, 1944. The workmanship was so crude it looked unfinished. The front sight was crooked. I flung it into the rocks. "Trash," I muttered. Then I holstered my M1911A1 and patted the grip. This is what we're taking home. When Iwo Jima finally fell, we planted our flag on Suribachi. Down on the black beaches, thousands of M1911A1s stood beside their owners, scarred, dust-covered, but unbroken. They proved a simple truth. War isn't just willpower. It's also steel and industry, and our steel was harder. April 1945, Okinawa. If we thought Iwo was the worst, we were wrong. Okinawa was the real meat grinder, the Typhoon of Steel. Rain fell harder than in the Philippines. Mud was deeper than on Guadalcanal. We got stuck in front of the Shuri line, inching forward. Here, my M1911A1 mattered more than ever, not just against soldiers, but against suicide attackers hiding among civilians. On Sugarloaf Hill, we hit the craziest counterattack of the war. Thick fog. You couldn't see 5 yards. Sparks and I were hunkered in a shell hole, rain up to our shins. Footsteps pounded from out of the mist. No bonsai screams, just heavy breathing. A wave of suicide troops burst out, carrying satchel charges and homemade spears. No rifles, just explosives and sharpened sticks. At that distance, machine guns couldn't traverse fast enough. I yanked out the M1911A1, one hand on the pistol, the other clamping my helmet down. Bang! The first shadow dropped less than 10 feet away. I'd hit his knee, and the .45 shattered his leg. He pitched forward, the satchel detonating a safe distance away, mud and meat showering us. Then the second one, practically on top of Sparks. Sparks' carbine jammed. Damn mud again. He raised it like a club, despair on his face. I swung the pistol purely on muscle memory from thousands of drills. Bang, bang. 2 .45 rounds hammered into the man's ribs. He flew sideways like he'd been hit by an invisible truck. That night, my slide got so hot, the rain sizzled into white steam when it hit. I burned through all 7 of my own mags and had to pick up fallen Marines' pistols to keep shooting. At dawn, the slope in front of us was covered in bodies. I looked down at my smoking M1911A1. The The slide was heat-darkened, and the rifling in the barrel was probably half-worn. But the pistol was intact, cocked, and ready. It never jammed. Not once. In the last stages of Okinawa, we weren't just fighting an army. We were fighting the collapse of Japan's industrial base. On one cave-clearing mission, we captured a batch of brand-new Japanese weapons. I picked up a Nambu Type 14 and almost laughed out loud. This was the so-called late-war production. The surface wasn't even polished. It was covered in rough tool marks. The wooden grips were gone, replaced with cheap plywood. The cocking knob was just a bent hook. The magazine was the worst of all. The spring felt like boiled noodles. I tried loading it to capacity. The rounds popped themselves right out of the feed lips. "This is what they plan to defend the home islands with?" Sparks snorted, staring at the pile of scrap. It wasn't just pistols. We saw last-ditch Arisaka Type 99 rifles, stocks made from green wood still damp with sap, bark half on, sling made from rope. Sights were a plain metal tab. They'd even dropped the handguard to save steel. These things didn't need us to destroy them. They could blow up in the shooter's face. I looked at the M1911A1 on my hip. Mine was a 1943 mass-production gun, had spent 3 years in mud and fire. The bluing was gone, but the steel was solid, the fit still sound, every part gleaming with the cold light of real industry. This wasn't just a gap in weapons, it was a gap in centuries. We were modern, standardized industry. They'd fallen back to village blacksmiths. By August 1945, we were gearing up for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan itself. It was everyone's nightmare. Based on Okinawa's casualty rates, going ashore in Japan meant at least half of us weren't coming back. Then the two flashes came: Hiroshima, Nagasaki. On August 15th, a hot, breathless noon, that strange jewel voice broadcast came over the radio. We didn't understand Japanese, but when we saw prisoners dropping to their knees and sobbing, we knew. It was over. The world suddenly went quiet. No artillery, no machine guns, just the waves slapping against the hull. I dropped to my knees too, not for their emperor, but in thanks to God, and to the pistol that had kept me alive long enough to hear this. In September, we went ashore as part of the occupation force. Walking into Yokosuka Naval Arsenal as a victor was something else. Huge factory floors stood empty, machines stripped or rusting. One warehouse was stacked with confiscated weapons, thousands of samurai swords dumped in piles like firewood, mountains of Nambu pistols and Arisaka rifles. I picked up a half-finished Nambu Type 14 from a workbench. The metal was full of pits, recycled scrap, badly smelted. At the other end of the hall, our ordnance men were unloading supplies, crates upon crates of brand-new M1911A1s, each wrapped in oiled paper, packed in dry wood boxes. Beside them, a wall of 45 ACP ammunition cans. There was your answer to the war. Not Bushido, not kamikaze, not mystical, spirit. It was Remington's assembly lines, Pittsburgh steel, Texas oil, Detroit engines. It was the industrial giant behind the M1911A1, massive, rational, cold, and efficient, that crushed that fever dream empire in the East. In the fall of 1945, I boarded a troopship home under Operation Magic Carpet. Regs said we could bring back one war trophy. We could even buy our issued sidearm. I didn't hesitate. I paid the money, signed the papers, and kept the old partner that had walked with me through the Pacific. When the Golden Gate Bridge rose out of the fog, the ship went wild. I just stood quietly at the rail, my hand on the pistol. I thought of Mike, of Bordelon, of all the brothers who'd never leave the black sand in the green jungle. Is it heavy? On a scale, just 1.1 kilos. Is it heavy? It carries so many lives, so many memories, so much terror and courage. It feels like it weighs a lifetime. Back in Ohio, I cleaned it carefully, locked it in my desk drawer. I rarely took it out. Maybe on Veterans Day each year, or on nights like this, when the rain and the wind bring back voices. It stopped being just a killing tool. It became an anchor for an entire era. And now, 1985. I hear on the news the U.S. military has decided to replace the M1911A1 with some Italian 9mm called the Beretta 92F. That's blasphemy, I shouted at the TV. 9mm? That's for those European gentlemen's wars. We need 45. We need stopping power. We need the kind of punch that makes a man with a bayonet sit down and stay down with one shot. They say the M1911 is too heavy, too few rounds, too much recoil. They don't get it. When you're in a pitch-black, rain-soaked night in a trench full of mud, when death is charging you head-on, you don't need some featherweight plastic toy with 15 peanut-sized rounds in the magazine. You need iron. You need a chunk of American steel designed by John Browning, tempered by 2 world wars, and utterly, stubbornly reliable. You need that feeling of weight in your hand, the weight of Colt, of Remington, of the entire industrial power of the United States. I wipe a fresh coat of oil onto my old partner. It's old now. The serial number's worn down. Scratches cover the metal around the ejection port. I'm old too. The age spots on my hands outnumber the rust on the gun. But I know if I squeeze the trigger, it'll still give that deep, chest-shaking roar. Legends don't rust. The M1911A1 is more than a pistol. It was our torch in the darkest hours. It's the guardian angel that still watches over every old Marine who crawled out of hell and somehow made it home.